Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share yet another update on my experience with the Sony A7R Mark II, this full-frame 42-megapixel backlit censored beast priced at $3,200 US. Body alone is, in my opinion, one of the best cameras ever made, period, the end. Recently, my last piece of coverage regarding this camera, I discussed some of its flaws. After all, no product, let alone DI product, is perfect. And the A7R Mark II is no exception. It overheats after an hour plus of UHD video capture. There are things you can do to mitigate that, but I know that's disappointing for many video pros that were looking forward to that Super 35 capability that this camera has to offer, unlike any other full-frame imaging device at its price. Again, $3,200, a relative bargain considering that Super 35 and S-Log capability built into this body with image stabilization, 5-axis. So that means when working with Sony FE lenses, like you see the crowded frame right now, all FE glass, you get all 5 axes, of stabilization. Take off native glass like this, use Sony Alpha glass, use any third-party lens, you get at least 3 axes of stabilization. So that's something that is important to know regarding stability, and really the A7R Mark II being the most flexible, much like the A7, of any full-frame mirrorless interchangeable lens camera when it comes to working with glass outside of its own ecosystem, which is the E-mount, and specifically the full-frame E-mount, known as FE. So the lenses I have here that I wanted to discuss today, for those of you that are picking up the A7R Mark II and just jumping into the FE world, or maybe you are already in it, I think are some of the best options. No primes here at all. We've got constant f4 across all 3 of these, and then a wider range here on the 24 to 240. But these are very different pieces of glass. In my opinion, the Zeiss that I have on board and to the right, the 16 to 35 is a great pairing for this camera. A great wide-angle lens that also has stabilization. All of these lenses, by the way, have optical steady shot, so that just gives you even more leverage on the already built-in stabilization that the A7R Mark II brings to the table out of the box. The 24 to 70 f4 Zeiss lens, another great piece of glass, basically extending the range that the 16 to 35 lays with that f4 foundation as well. And then if you want to go even beyond, that's where the 70 to 200 G piece of glass steps in and really ups your game. Now, whether we're talking about still or video quality, frankly, what I've seen this camera output is amazing. And that's with all 3 of these lenses. Handheld, silent shutter, no shutter shock issues whatsoever, so the days of worrying about mounting like on the original A7R, which I have right here, really doesn't exist in the brand new A7R Mark II world. So $1,500 for this lens. I think right now they are all on sale. That's another reason I am sharing all of these lenses with you, is because currently Sony does have a promo running on all of their FE glass. Pretty much the least discounted is this 24 to 240, and that's because I think it does sell very well. After all, it covers the broadest range of any full-frame E-mount native piece of glass that Sony makes, has very nice quality across the entire range. I did review this in the past, and it is a personal favorite of mine, and that's part of the reason you're seeing it today here in this video, because I think with the A7R Mark II, for many of you, this is going to be the only lens you're going to need. Yes, it's heavy, and granted, this is all much heavier to carry, but this covers almost the entire range that I just showed you with those 3 lenses, but granted not with an f4 aperture across its zoom capability. So this is not as fast a piece of glass as these 3, but in terms of versatility, being maybe the perfect travel lens, of course, that it probably or likely is. And if you've watched my review of the 24 to 240, then you already know what I think of that lens, and of course its optical stabilization and overall capability. Much like Sony's lineage of 18 to 200 millimeter APS-C E-mount glass, they finally brought something comparable to the FE world, and that is a good thing, because Oddly enough, they produced so many copies of the 18-200, but left the full frame realm cold. So great lens, but definitely I would say that not the polar opposite of this grouping, but very, very different. I mean, clearly this is for the person that only wants one lens. They want convenience. They don't want to expose the sensor out in the field, and they know they're shooting with enough light that the speed of the glass isn't going to necessarily be an inhibiting factor. Also, the low light capability of the A7R Mark II does greatly compensate on the performance of this piece of glass, not having the f4 aperture that is sported among this group of its so-called peers. So that's another thing to take into account. Yes, slower glass with the 24-240, but the camera now in many ways compensates for that slowness. Now when it comes to autofocus, the body itself has 399 points of phase detection. That is a big jump. In the mirrorless world, unmatched. In the full frame world, a feat. And there is no question Sony's eye detection system for autofocus, where it locks onto your subject's retina and you can assign that, is another incredible feature which works with all of these lenses because they are all native FE. Once you step outside of the FE, in other words, again, full frame E-mount lens realm, you lose basically any nicety, any reason that Sony would give you to invest in their glass beyond the actual, image quality, both in still and video. So I hope this gives you a nice round out of what to expect with these lenses. $1,500 was the original retail on the 70-200. I think it's worth every penny if you're after a lens like this. It is reduced now in cost. The 24-70, I believe an $1,100 lens. I also think this is a great, if you're looking for traditional zoom lens, this is it. There are rumors that Sony's coming out with a faster version of this lens. Once it drops, you're likely going to see it here, even though Sony likely won't furnish me with one. The FE 16-35 Zeiss lens that's mounted right now, the reason it's on the camera is because it is the lens that I am testing the most. It is the newest lens in my lineup, and arguably maybe one of the best. If you've looked at reviews, if you've looked at sample images, then you already know that this is a monster piece of glass in the FE lineup and has been around for a while. So it's not brand new, but it's something I've been wanting to add, and the A7R Mark II gave me a very good reason to bring it into the stable. Very little distortion, even at 16 millimeters, and just incredible sharpness on this lens, something that you wouldn't expect even from Zeiss and Sony, frankly, at the price that they've delivered it. Some people will call these lenses expensive, but in the scope of things, I think Sony is very affordable when it comes to what they are putting out now as competent pro gear, or at least geared towards professionals, because on paper, this has much more than the competition. Of course, the overheating is an issue. Battery life is another issue. I mentioned that in my last update. But those are things that can be worked around in different ways, whether you use external battery packs. There are so many different large capacity battery packs out there that are micro USB driven that will work with this and keep some of the heat off of this camera body rather than the actual battery itself, because the heat sink and the writing to the card, the SD card, that's enough in itself. A great thing to have is something like this Kingston that I've been working with, not the 512, but the 256 for the UHD still combo. Of course, you can use the 512, but then forget about UHD video. You'll be capturing strictly 1080p since it's not a U3 rated card. The 256, on the other hand, is, and this has an 80 megabyte write speed. So you can do everything. I think this is really, if you have both of these, you have everything you need for both still and video for an entire shoot, trip. So much capacity. We're nearly at a terabyte between two cards. Also a lot to lose, but I do have faith in the brand. So really like what Sony's done here. The FE lineup has matured considerably. The A7R Mark II, I think, in every way does deliver. Again, the overheating and battery life are the only areas of my own personal contention with the camera. The viewfinder is improved. Overall autofocus capability is definitely enhanced beyond just the eye lock on, which, by the way, is not a gimmick. You can even assign which subject you want that eye automatic eye detection focus to stay locked on, so that tracking, which used to plague Sony's cameras, has been pretty much, I won't say eliminated, but boy, has it been dealt with. But something that I'm really looking forward to testing over my travels coming up soon is the performance, again, with the 24 to 240, because I think that does have mass appeal in a way that these three f4 zoom lenses simply don't, because they're so expensive. And again, this covers basically even more range when you take into account that we're going to 240 as opposed to 200 here. Even though it starts at 24, and here we're starting at 16, and 1,000 versus, well, much more than 1,000. Each of these lenses is over $1,000, no matter what sale, or even if you're picking them up secondhand, which is an iffy process to prove. You're going to spend so much more. So I think it's warranted to want to know how this lens is going to perform, again, because the A7R Mark II does perform so much better under low light than its predecessor. So again, this is really a video about the FE glass I have experience with. I also still shoot with my E-mount APS-C 10 to 18 f4 Sony lens, because it does work in a limited range, pretty much between 14 and 16, maybe 12. I mean, you're going to get some distortion there, but it does work, and it is a really compact lens. I mean, when you look at it in comparison to the 16 to 35, it is a fraction of the size. And I think that's what a lot of people wish FE glass looked like. The reality is, when you get to full frame and you want any sort of speed, you're going to have to put that size somewhere, and that's what the FE lineup of lenses reflects. I think Sony's done an amazing job building this from the ground up. This is something no other manufacturer has done to date. There are a lot of APS-C mirrorless cameras out there that can do things like the A7R Mark II, but there are literally no cameras that are mirrorless, or not for that matter, that can do what the A7R Mark II can do collectively. And that doesn't buy it a right to have shortcomings, but every single digital imaging product does. So this concept that this has to be perfect, that it can't overheat, Sony knew what they were putting out. I think it disappoints some. It does disappoint me personally, but for my shooting style, I am not a videographer at a wedding, so I'm not going to run into the problem of overheating being a real issue. In fact, my video clips may be spaced out enough that I'm not even going to overheat going to my third battery and my third 30-minute clip. So it's really all a matter of how you shoot. Because it's not going to overheat shooting stills. It's only going to overheat in the video side of things. I mean, there are reports of taking steady shot off making a difference on the overheating. I personally haven't messed with that, because that's going a little bit too far for my own personal taste. But if it does work, that's another way that you could be able to mitigate heat issues. But when it comes to FE glass, there's no argument anymore. I mean, I don't even have the primes out here, whether we're talking about the 35, the new 35, that is, the 1.4, the 90 mil. I mean, just some top-rated glass that really Sony has done an exceptional job putting out for a body that well deserves it. And that doesn't take anything away from the A7 or the first generation, the A7 Mark II I meant, or the first generation of A7 cameras. It's just a matter of that, much like the lens lineup maturing, so are the bodies. And the A7R Mark II, in my opinion, is really the pinnacle right now of Sony's DI, and the fact that it can shoot best-in-class 42-megapixel raw stills with low-light capability, unlike any other camera, and an autofocus system to match, and then on top of that, the UHD video capability, Super 35, as well as full-frame 4K, and clearly the Super 35 is more desirable, so that's what makes this camera better than anything else in that department in attempting to do or deliver the best to a professional or an amateur or an entry-level person who's spending more money than they ever should be. Okay, let's try to include everybody instead of people becoming snobs, which often happens in response to my reviews when they're really directed at everyone, from beginners to professionals. And hopefully people understand that, again, this is not a perfect camera, but when it comes to what it can do, there simply is nothing else like it on the market. My biggest qualm with this camera still lies in battery life. I wish it was better. But build quality, fantastic. The construction is solid as a rock. I don't have any fear of working with larger lenses on it. Not that I did in the previous generation, but a lot of consumers did. That fear is gone. So I'm not going to have any concern when I'm walking around shooting with, by the way, I think these f4 lenses are a great match for the A7R Mark II. But when you pop on something like the 24 to 240, which did seem really large on the A7R, here, yes, it's still fairly large, but throw it up next to the 70 to 200, and you can see the tremendous difference. And of course, the quality here is superior and will be in just about every way, but the convenience of having something like this, for many of you, this is going to be a lens that will live on this camera. And some will say, well, how could a $1,000 piece of glass, what kind of person would buy a $3,200 body and support it with a $1,000 piece of glass? Newsflash, Sony actually doesn't kill you when it comes to glass quality. They tend to be, as I mentioned before, I would say pretty accurate on what you get for your money. And they make sure that they're not putting out duds so that even at $1,000 or a little under, like this lens is on sale for now, you're getting a very complete piece of DI equipment that is going to suit the A7R Mark II in a great way, especially if you are interested in that range and specifically if you're after capturing great video. Of course, a power version of this would be on my wish list. We don't have that right now. We have that 135mm lens, which is a cinema quality lens, so that's huge, but it's also fairly expensive. But again, a value compared to glass of its nature, but would be tremendous on here. So if they could end up making a lens like this, that's similar to the 18 to 200 APS-C power zoom that I've covered in the past, which by the way is a great match for this if you're just going to shoot 4K video. But then when you jump into still mode, you are stuck in APS-C world, which is the problem with that lens. So we still need a full frame power zoom, Sony, that matches this form factor and gives us a similar range to what you've been able to cram into the 24 to 240. And I know people will be willing to pay for that because you have created something that, even though it overheats, is a UHD monster. So love the camera. The lenses, you already know my opinion on most except for the wide angle, which I'm still working on. But a lot of good stuff here from Sony. No surprise. They've invested a lot. This is where they're making money, and there's a reason. They're outperforming when it comes to pushing the envelope in digital imaging, both in still and video. And video used to be their bread and butter, but slowly, well, not so slowly anymore. Konica Minolta was over 15 years ago, the acquisition. Now, I believe it's roughly 15 years. We're finally seeing the fruits of that acquisition here in the A7R Mark II, and the marriage of Sony's technological know-how, both in creating sensors, being basically the standard in video, and now becoming a standard in still. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.